They called her the ship that wouldn't die, hunted by two navies, bombed, torpedoed, set ablaze, yet still refusing to sink. 80 years later, an underwater drone reveals her final secret. Deep inside the wreck of the USS Hornet, a fighter plane waits, pristine, like it could launch at any second, 17,500 feet down in eternal midnight. How did one carrier absorb so much violence, and why does her preserved hangar feel so disturbingly untouched? The answer begins with the most dangerous mission of World War II. On March 31st, 1942, the USS Hornet pulled alongside the pier at Alameda Naval Air Station. The carrier's own fighter and bomber planes were struck below into the hangar, making space for a cargo no one in the Navy had ever attempted. 16. Army B-25B. Mitchell bombers. Army airmen, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, rolled their twin-engine bombers onto the wooden flight deck. Their olive-drab paint and the star in a circle insignia were a stark contrast to the Navy's blue-gray Wildcats and Devastators. Sailors lashed down the bombers with heavy chains, wings overlapping, propellers gleaming under the California sun. Each aircraft was loaded with extra fuel tanks, stripped of unnecessary weight, and packed with incendiaries and high-explosive bombs. The Hornet's crew watched this spectacle in silence. No one outside a handful of officers knew the real mission. Orders were sealed. The ship would sail at dawn. Destination unknown. On April 2nd, 1942, the carrier slipped under the Golden Gate Bridge, vanishing into the Pacific with her secret cargo and 134 Army aviators aboard. Rumors swirled below decks. Some guessed Pearl Harbor, others the Philippines. No one imagined the truth. For nearly 2 weeks, the Hornet steamed west, escorted by a small task force under Admiral Halsey. The B-25 sat exposed to salt spray and wind, their crews eating Navy rations and sleeping in borrowed bunks. On April 17, 1942, the officers finally gathered the Army flyers and the Navy crew. The target was revealed: Tokyo. 16 bombers, each with a 5-man crew, would launch from the deck, something no one had ever tried with a land-based bomber. The plan called for a launch 400 miles from Japan, a quick strike on military targets, then a dash to friendly airfields in China. Every man knew the risks. The margin for error was razor thin. At dawn on April 18, 1942, a Japanese picket boat spotted the task force. There was no choice. Launch immediately, 650 miles out, farther than anyone had trained for. On a rolling deck with barely enough runway, each B-25 roared down the planks and lifted off into heavy mist. The Hornet's crew erupted in cheers. The deck was empty. The impossible had happened. For the men aboard, the gamble had paid off. They had struck at the heart of the enemy, proving that even the home islands were not safe. Morale soared across the Pacific. In a single morning, the USS Hornet became more than just a ship. She became a symbol of American daring and a target that no enemy could afford to ignore. In Tokyo's war rooms, the news of bombers over the capital struck like a thunderclap. Japanese intelligence pieced together the impossible. American Army bombers had launched from a carrier force lurking somewhere in the Pacific. The Doolittle Raid exposed a vulnerability the Imperial Navy could not ignore. In the aftermath, the brass did not need to name a specific ship. Every American carrier became a threat to national pride. But the Hornet, though her name was unknown to Japanese planners at first, stood at the center of their anger. She had carried the bombers that humiliated the Emperor's home islands. The hunt for American carriers turned relentless. Orders radiated outward: find the enemy fleet, destroy their carriers, and erase the insult. Japanese carrier groups, led by Shokaku and Zuikaku, sharpened their focus. Reconnaissance planes scoured the sea for any sign of a United States task force. Every radio intercept, every shadow on the horizon was weighed for clues. The Hornet, by virtue of her daring and her presence at every major Pacific clash, drew the weight of that fury. For the Japanese air crews, the American carriers were not just tactical targets, they were symbols. The men who attacked Pearl Harbor now found themselves chasing a ghost, a ship that had struck at the heart of Japan and vanished back into the fog. In briefings before the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, pilots were told to ignore secondary targets. Only the enemy carriers mattered. Only their destruction could restore honor. On October 26, 1942, as the sun rose over the Solomon Islands, the search came to an end. Japanese scouts sighted the American fleet. The Hornet was visible and exposed, her deck crowded with aircraft. The enemy's resolve hardened. Dive bombers and torpedo planes readied for launch, each crew knowing their mission was to break the backbone of American naval power. The price of symbolism was about to be paid in fire and steel. The Hornet, now unmistakable in the crosshairs, would face the full measure of a nation's vengeance. Bombers formed up in the morning haze, engines rumbling over the Solomon Sea. The first wave of Japanese aircraft broke through the cloud cover just after 9 in the morning, gunning for the American carrier that stood alone and exposed. Hornet's anti-aircraft batteries thundered to life, tracers lacing the sky, but the attackers pressed in. A Val dive bomber released its payload from barely 1,000 feet. A 250-kilogram bomb tore through the flight deck near the island, exploding inside the ship and sending shrapnel deep into the heart of the carrier. Seconds later, another bomb struck forward, igniting aviation fuel and scattering burning debris across the bow. Crewmen struggled to contain the fires as smoke filled the passageways, but the hits kept coming. A third bomb slammed into the stern, collapsing sections of the hangar deck and trapping sailors below. The impact knocked out communications and sent shockwaves through the steel hull. While damage control teams raced to fight the spreading flames, a formation of Kate torpedo bombers lined up on Hornet's starboard side. 2 torpedoes found their mark, punching gaping holes below the waterline. Seawater surged through ruptured compartments, flooding engine rooms and shorting out electrical panels. The lights flickered and died. Pumps failed. The ship began to list as power vanished from the main generators. On the bridge, orders snapped out: seal the watertight doors, shift power to the auxiliary circuits, keep the ship moving. But the damage was too deep. Steering failed as the rudder jammed, leaving Hornet wallowing helplessly in the open sea. As the crew fought to keep her alive, a crippled Val, trailing smoke and flames, peeled off from the melee. The pilot aimed his dying aircraft at the carrier's stack. With a final burst of speed, the bomber crashed into the signal bridge, tearing through radio rooms and setting off another inferno. Flames leapt across the superstructure, burning through cables and engulfing the navigation bridge. Below decks, sailors crawled through choking smoke, dragging hoses and hauling wounded men from the wreckage. The air was thick with the stench of burning oil and scorched paint. Damage control parties worked by flashlight, bracing bulkheads and patching holes as water rose around their boots. The roar of secondary explosions echoed through the hull, ammunition cooking off, fuel tanks rupturing, steam lines bursting under pressure. Every minute the list grew steeper, the decks more treacherous. A second torpedo slammed into the starboard side, flooding machinery spaces and sealing the fate of the engines. Hornet shuddered and slowed, then stopped altogether. The carrier was dead in the water, drifting and burning, surrounded by the debris of her own destruction. All around, the sea was littered with fragments of aircraft, life rafts, and bodies. Overhead, the attackers circled for another pass, but the ship's fate was already written in fire and steel. The order to abandon ship was whispered down the passageways, and the men who had survived the onslaught began the grim retreat to the rails, leaving behind the battered hulk that had once carried them into battle. USS Hornet drifted, powerless and burning as the last men scrambled away in lifeboats. The order came down: she could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. 2 American destroyers, Mustin and Anderson, received the task no sailor wants: to sink their own fleet carrier. Both ships closed in, maneuvering alongside the battered hulk as night fell over the Pacific. Their crews loaded torpedoes and readied the 5-inch guns, working by the flicker of fire still burning inside Hornet's hull. Torpedo men on Mustin and Anderson set their sights on the carrier's waterline. Between them, they launched a spread of Mark 15 torpedoes, 9 in all, according to the combined action reports. Some torpedoes ran true, slamming into the hull with heavy detonations. Others failed to explode, duds swallowed by the sea. The destroyer circled, firing again and again, but Hornet's compartmentalized structure absorbed the punishment. Flooding was uneven, and the ship's internal bulkheads held longer than expected. The carrier rocked with each explosion, but still refused to settle. With torpedoes expended, the destroyers turned to their main batteries. 5-inch shells raked the flight deck and superstructure. Over 400 rounds hammered the steel, tearing open compartments and sending up showers of sparks. Shells punched through the island and splintered the bridge, but the ship's massive frame remained stubbornly intact. From the destroyer's bridges, officers watched for signs that Hornet would finally roll or break apart. Instead, she listed slowly, fires glowing through the night, still afloat. The decision to destroy a ship like Hornet was not made lightly. The crew had already been evacuated, but the act weighed on every man involved. Official U.S. Navy doctrine left no room for sentiment. A carrier abandoned in enemy waters could not be captured, studied, or used for propaganda. Yet as the shells and torpedoes struck home, sailors on Mustin and Anderson witnessed the resilience of a ship they had fought alongside. The carrier's stubborn refusal to sink became a final act of defiance. Reports from the destroyers noted the technical frustrations. Torpedo reliability had plagued the fleet since the start of the war. Duds were common, and the Mark 15's performance at close range was unpredictable. Compartmentalization and the ship's reserve buoyancy, designed to survive battle, now worked against the scuttling effort. Even as water poured in through the new holes, Hornet's hull refused to give up. The destroyer's gunners watched the clock, aware that Japanese forces were closing in. Each minute spent firing into their own flagship risked their own safety. With ammunition running low and enemy ships approaching, the American destroyers received the order to withdraw. Hornet, riddled with holes and burning from stem to stern, drifted alone in the darkness. The men who watched her from a distance could only wonder how much more it would take to put the ship under. In the end, the decision to scuttle Hornet was a matter of necessity, not vengeance, a calculated act to deny the enemy, carried out by men who understood both the cost and the honor of their duty. The carrier's survival through this barrage would leave a puzzle for future investigators, which holes came from enemy fire and which were the work of her own escorts. For now, the ship that wouldn't die floated on, awaiting her final fate. In January 2019, the research vessel Petrel tracked a faint echo across the Pacific floor east of the Solomon Islands. The coordinates matched the last reported position of USS Hornet, lost for more than 7 decades. As the search team prepared the remotely operated vehicle, every movement was measured, because a slip at this depth could mean losing the vehicle forever. The remotely operated vehicle's titanium shell and reinforced cameras were built for the abyss, designed to withstand crushing pressure that reaches nearly 8,000 pounds per square inch at 5,330 meters. That is over 5,000 feet deeper than where Titanic rests. The descent took hours. Layer by layer, sunlight vanished, and the world narrowed to a cone of cold LED light and sonar pulses. At 3 miles down, the ocean is silent, close to freezing, and utterly black. Few machines have ever survived here. The vehicle's thrusters adjusted in tiny bursts, keeping a careful distance above the seabed. The first glimpse of Hornet's hull came out of the darkness as a jagged silhouette, steel plates twisted and perforated, battered by torpedoes, bombs, and the ship's own scuttling. The island structure still stood, though pocked and collapsed in places. Paint clung to the metal, shielded from the sun and scavengers by the depth. This was not a reef of bones and coral, but a sealed vault, untouched since the night Hornet slipped beneath the waves. For the Petrel team, every pass of the vehicle's lights revealed a battlefield frozen in time, a warship preserved by pressure and cold, waiting to give up its secrets. Inside the hangar deck, the drone's lights sweep over a scene untouched since 1942. A Grumman F4F4 Wildcat sits with its wings folded, tires still gripping the deck, blue-gray paint and the White Star insignia preserved by the cold and darkness. The canopy remains sealed, as if waiting for a pilot who will never return. Parked beside the fighter, a squat aircraft tug, likely built by International Harvester, rests exactly where it was left, its frame intact. The tractor's familiar outline, so common on wartime carriers, now stands as a silent partner to the Wildcat, both machines frozen in their last moment of readiness. Near a hatch, a length of fabric dangles, a sailor's coat or perhaps a canvas cover caught on a door latch. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes. This was not a space cleared out in order. The crew walked away in haste, leaving behind the tools of their trade, the routines of daily life interrupted by catastrophe. The hangar is a time capsule, holding the evidence of sudden loss and unfinished work. No sign of internal explosions, no scattered debris from a magazine blast, just aircraft stowed, equipment parked, and personal effects still in place. Above this tableau, the final chapter played out on the surface. As American destroyers withdrew, Japanese destroyers Akigumo and Makigumo closed in. 4 Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes struck home, overwhelming the battered hull at last. At 1:35 a.m., the Hornet slipped beneath the waves. 140 men remained entombed within her steel walls, their final resting place marked by the plane, the tug, and the coat. Ordinary objects now transformed into a memorial at the bottom of the world. 77 years later, Hornet's hangar is still sealed tight, its fighter intact, its secrets unspoken. At 17,500 feet, the pressures of war and ocean remain locked together. As new technology reaches deeper, we confront not just lost machines, but the cost of resilience. War leaves relics in silence. We decide what lessons, if any, rise to the surface. What would you want left behind at the bottom of history?